Jerry Gidel is going to comment a choppy week in the commodity markets in the context of a war. Right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe. So, Jerry, we started the week with some negatives, especially for wheat, and we had USDA report, and we finished the week with a new rally for corn and soybeans. Soybeans actually had some negative numbers. So let's start with the USDA report. What have you seen there?
Well, the USDA report, as you mentioned, had a little bit of information for everybody. You looked at the U.S. side of things here, and we're trying to reflect as to what the impact of what was going on in Ukraine might be on the U.S. exports, and also, of course, in the background of this, and probably even more important than anything for the soybean market and corn, is what was going on with the USDA's numbers there, for how they updated their South American prospects at this point. Really, it's the soybean side of things. They made quite an additional correction here between the Brazilian number. They took it down all the way to 127. That's down 7 million. They took 1.5 million out of the Argentine number, and they took 1 million out of Paraguay. So there you are, 9.5 million down. 10 million is an easy figure of 370 million. That's really making things interesting. It's kind of surprising that USDA is ending carryover stock. They increased their exports by 40, but there's people out there anticipating that might go down further. Excuse me. Moving over to the corn side of things here, the USDA went ahead and made some adjustments there too. The corn exports really were more involving what was going on in Ukraine because of the fact that they are the very significant exporter here in the world. Really, I guess they're number 4 at this point on exports around the world. And so the prospects of some of the previous sales that they have on the books and also what was going to be there, maybe we're talking 10 to 12, maybe 14 million bushels, a million metric tons, I should say, that might not get out of that country considering the ongoing military action going around the country. And also to some extent, their Ukraine ports have been really closed since the war began. And there's been minor amounts of stuff coming out of Russia at this point from there, primarily because of the sanctions on the financial world and also the insurance factors for boats and things of that nature. Not too many people want to end up going ahead and somehow or other get a boat blown up, and that the cost of doing that for insurance is sometimes prohibited from there. And also, to some extent, the prices here that some people have paid in North Africa. I think Tunisia had a price point went up over $150 a ton for wheat. So that's from what they bought before the war and after. So those are the kind of things that happened there. On the corn side, they went ahead and took 75 million out of the, they added 75 million out of in exports, and they added up to another 25 million in ethanol because of the higher prices of gasoline here in the U.S. That suggests that we'll have a pretty good push of on more blending into the U.S. gasoline price. So that's 100 million, and so we went from 1.54, I should say, down to 1.44 billion bushels, and that both go in the right direction. I have to say that both of them, I think the popular believing that those could go lower depending on what happens and how long the Mideast situation continues here on the corn, and on the soybean side of things, what might happen on the ideas of the final numbers coming out of out of South America in general at this point.
In the market in general, I think one thing that has impacted at least energy-related products such as corn is the announcement of some countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates that they would produce more oil.
Well, there's been ups and downs on ideas how much more might be coming out from some of those countries, and that has tempered things on the oil prices that were extremely high late last week and early over the weekend in that. And to some extent that has tempered, like you say, in the corn thighs things because of the relationship to ethanol and that. Of course, we don't want to forget about the ideas of wheat at this point, and to some extent, the wheat prices and the energy prices have been really the two barometers, if you will, of what's going on in this whole thing because of the high percentage of the world's trade of close to 30 to 32% of the world's trade of wheat is centered in the Black Sea. And so that's a feature, along, of course, with all the energy connection between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe is quite extensive. So that's the feature there. On the wheat side here, the data, by the way, from the USDA, interesting. When I was looking for even just a small decline or a small increase, I should say, in the demand for wheat. The USDA didn't even give us that. They only took about they actually took 10 million out of it. And they actually decreased imports by 5. And that I know that the US dollar and the lack of enthusiasm here in the US wheat market, despite what's going on, and that is there, but I got to feel like there might be some strength later on. But in the short term, that didn't help the price of wheat once it was released on Wednesday. Plus, we ended up having a negative limit down action before the thing was actually announced there at 11 o'clock Central Time here in Chicago. And so that feature that came in it, and that part of the influence of that also was the fact that the world number from the USDA, they cut back the exports in both Russia and also in Ukraine by about 7 million metric tons. So that was going to come back, and we actually saw the increase in the carryover stock worldwide. And that was kind of the backdrop of limiting that particular market from any enthusiasm and that. And so the limit ups of last week turned into those limit downs this week, and they actually expanded the actual trading limits from 50 and 75 cents to 85 and $1.30. And so things really had some really dynamic price activities. It looks like, though, by today's action that we've really I think washed out a lot of the emotions in that market. And we actually closed up slightly today in the wheat. And to some extent, the world demand and the trading activity could come back into this thing short term. And I'm not sure we're going to make new highs, but in this thing, because it's a lot of things have to happen yet in this market to get things cranked up as emotional as it was last week. But at the same time, the fundamentals here of the U.S. wheat conditions in the Southwest, Canada's prairies also very dry, and things like that. That's the whole thing about this thing, is that the new crop spring planting in the Northern Hemisphere is really about to burst here in the next month or so. And April 1st, April 15th, things will be changing a lot, and what's happening there will also have a huge impact on where prices will go. But in the short term here, we've had quite an emotional rally and roller coaster here.
Yes, and what we have seen during the week, some short-term opportunities for some countries. India has sold some wheat, some volume of wheat that they had in reserves.
Exactly. That's also came into this thing here, India and also Australia. Now, there's different opinions from in some of the traders over there. There's going to be extra capacity to get more wheat out of Australia, but they've also had quite a crop over there already. They had a good one last year, and they got a good one this year, and they got wheat to sell. The biggest problem is that they're really running at a super fast pace already. The Indians, I think, are definitely going to be a factor. There's actually, if you look at their the USDA, when you looked at their World WASDE report, and that's based upon local marketing years, and that they're kind of anticipating that because really we're just within days here of the really big India crop coming in here. The kind of classic date is April 1st, and that so they got a lot of season in front of them, so they could be a real competitor in this thing and slow down, or excuse me, cover some of the needs out there that in the Mid East and over in Southeast Asia for supplies of wheat and that. From there, I can't say that they are a classic noodle type wheat. They're more of a bread and that type of wheat product. But at this point, they're going to potentially be a very strong competitor out there, and that's going to make an interesting situation here as to to cover up some of the lost supplies that's coming out of the Black Sea.
And in a context of higher inflation, what would be your marketing strategy in the point of view of farmers?
Well, that's definitely an interesting one at this point. They're a lot of their costs are have already been determined by sales or purchases ahead of time and things of that nature. They're all higher, and so that's part of the other reason. Sometimes the emotions of that, people forget about the fact that high prices also need to be covering higher costs, and so. Yeah, that's something I'm keeping a real close eye on. We've last week, or in our last conversation, I was talking about moving up our old crop sales and that up to 90%, and even kind of getting rid of some of the soft red wheat and that because it was getting to the point where there wasn't even markets, and then we had this crazy conditions here this week where it was sharply down. Winter wheat's a little tougher because that's the one out in Kansas in the Southwest and up through the plains, and that wheat there's some definitely some conditions out there that are not good, but at this point I think that's something to keep in mind. And then new crop wise here, I'm feeling pretty comfortable, or 0.25%, something like that, of your potential, but looking to what might happen here as we move up into the if we get above 770 here in the May Chicago price, that could actually give us a push all the way up into the all-time highs up there above $8 in the 825 to 840 zone. Right now, with the conditions in the Mid East in the Black Sea, as volatile as they are, that could end up being higher. I know both of us have heard prices are being quoted out here of pretty astronomical, $9 and $10. Not impossible, but I would have to say this is kind of time when you need to continue to scale up in corn and beans. So beans are a little trickier because the fact that the details on in the Black Sea are not that highly connected to the bean. The only sunflowers is really the only crop over there in the oilseed world, so that's not as easy to get there. We've been the $17.50, 17 to $18 mark. I would look as another scale up opportunity of 5 to 10%. And go from there. The one thing is floating around the world. Everybody's looking at their so-called fallow acres or CRP acres. Maybe open those things up. I guess I've been very cautious that that's really going to provide any significant amount of additional supplies in 1 year, because it costs a lot of money to get that rehabilitated and get any kind of timely cost of ingredients, from fertilizer to seeds. to get those all together. It's going to be tight. You know, there'll be some people do that if it happens, but I wouldn't say that that's going to be a huge jump in acreages here to make a major impact. We really have to have a good yield this year in the Northern Hemisphere to really make sure we can have supplies going forward.
And what do you expect from next week?
I got a strange feeling that this thing is going to creep up a little bit here at this point and challenge those numbers I just talked about. Wheat, I think, is in Chicago, at least. I think it needs to get back over $12 to get much momentum going on that one. But the other two are right up there against some previous highs that we've had this year and back in the wild days of 2012 and 13 when we had drought conditions here in the U.S. that were pretty significant.
All right, we'll see. Thank you, Sherry.
Of course, always good to talk, Luis, and we'll see what the Wild West does next week.